Voldemort was the most dangerous dark wizard in history, capable of splitting his soul, flying without a broom, and leading an army of Death Eaters that would kill on his command. But one person he could never kill, no matter how powerful he seemed to get, was Harry. Of course, this was largely circumstantial. Harry was protected, first by his mother's sacrifice, then by the Blood Wards at Privet Drive. Not to mention the twin wand cores, piece of Voldemort's soul inside of Harry, and the fact that Voldemort used Harry's blood to rebuild his body. They were, to some extent, inextricably tied to each other, and, as the prophecy so aptly put it, either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. But if we consider for a second that every failed attempt at killing Harry was magical in nature, it does reveal a slightly more obvious solution. The non-magical alternatives. Muggle weapons. If magic kept failing, if wands, curses and horcruxes couldn't seal the deal, then why not turn to something simpler? And moreover, why wasn't this sort of practice more common in the wizarding world as a whole? Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. The first thing I want to take a look at are the practical considerations for this theory. If Voldemort had used a gun, would it have gotten him any further? Would any of this have even been possible? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that wizards, just like muggles, are not impervious to physical harm. It may be the choice of magical beings to use magical means to harm each other, but that doesn't mean a knife or a gun won't work just the same. They have the same skin, the same nerve endings, and they are just as vulnerable as a regular person. I mean, just look at what happens when a wizard has a bad encounter with a bludger. And bearing this in mind, then I think it's a safe bet to say that witches and wizards also wouldn't be invulnerable to bullets. A gunshot to the head or heart, especially if unexpected, would likely kill a wizard just as easily as it would a muggle. Magic might allow for healing, yes, but not instant invulnerability. And most importantly, it would only help after the fact, assuming the victim survives. Furthermore, a gun doesn't rely on magical focus, wand allegiance, or spell accuracy. It's fast, mechanical, brutal, and in the right moment, far more reliable. So if Voldemort had opted for a gun and, say, cornered Harry in his sleep or caught him off guard, there's a real argument that it could have succeeded where even the killing curse failed. There's even an unverified quote from Rowling floating around which says, "In a fight between a muggle with a shotgun and a wizard with a wand, the muggle will win." But then that raises the next question. Would that have even worked in magical terms? Because while physical harm might have bypassed Harry's body, we also have to consider the magical protections around him, and whether a muggle method would have been able to bypass those as well. Harry's protections. Harry is often praised as a powerful young wizard, and while I can certainly give him credit for his tenacity and bravery, the truth is that he wasn't exceptionally gifted. Nearly every run-in that he had with Voldemort was survivable not because of skill, but because of circumstance, and more importantly, because of magic that wasn't his own. From the beginning, Harry was protected by a rare and ancient form of sacrificial magic that was unleashed by his mother upon her death, a form of defensive magic so powerful that even Voldemort couldn't penetrate it. And while the most famous example of this magic saving Harry effectively ended the First Wizarding War, the truth is that it protected him for much, much longer than that. While you can still call home the place where your mother's blood dwells, there you cannot be touched or harmed by Voldemort. He shed her blood, but it lives on in you and her sister. Her blood became your refuge. You need return there only once a year, but as long as you can still call it home, there he cannot hurt you. Your aunt knows this. I explained what I had done in the letter I left with you on her doorstep. She knows that allowing you house room may have well kept you alive for the past 15 years. This magic protected Harry for a while, but even when this specific protection wore off, Voldemort had unknowingly and foolishly tethered himself to Harry's survival by using Harry's blood to return to a body, which meant that both of them were protected by Lily's loving sacrifice. Dumbledore confirms this. He took your blood and rebuilt his living body with it. Your blood in his veins, Harry. Lily's protection inside both of you. He tethered you to life while he lives. And let's not forget the twin wand cores, which prevented Voldemort from overpowering Harry with the brute magical force. and the fact that part of Voldemort's soul was literally inside Harry, meaning any attempt to kill him was an attack on his own Horcrux. But here's the key detail. Every single one of these protections, the blood, the wands, the prophecy, they were all magical in nature. So if Voldemort had tried to bypass all of that using something non-magical, like a muggle weapon, I think it may have just worked. Of course, this theory only operates on the basis that magical protections might not have applied to a non-magical threat, but somehow I feel like that's the case. Harry's enchantments were built to block spells, curses, and dark magic, not bullets. But now the question is, if a gun would have worked, why didn't Voldemort do it? Voldemort's downfall. The answer as to why Voldemort never used muggle weapons to kill Harry is fairly nuanced, but I believe I've been able to dependently narrow it down to a few factors. Magical values. I think that one of the primary reasons that guns aren't used by the large majority of witches and wizards, let alone Voldemort, is the fact that it's just not a part of their culture. They don't exist anywhere, they're not advertised, no one owns them, there's no legislation surrounding them, and certainly no one is using them. They grow up in a world entirely devoid of weapons like that, and I suppose that aspect of Muggle culture just never found its way in. However, not all witches and wizards were born and raised in the magical world. Many grew up in the Muggle world, and spent a considerable amount of time there before attending Hogwarts. Presumably, these witches and wizards are at least familiar with Muggle technology, like guns. So if anyone were to consider using a weapon like a gun, then I expect these would be the people. But here's the thing. I don't think that witches and wizards, born in the magical world or not, want to adopt that part of Muggle society, or really any other parts of Muggle society for that matter. There's a deep-rooted cultural superiority embedded in the wizarding world, a belief that magic is not only more powerful than Muggle technology, but more elegant, more civilized, and more pure. Guns, bombs, and machines are seen as crude, the tools of a less evolved people. Even wizards who admire Muggle innovation, like Arthur Weasley, view it with a kind of detached curiosity, not as something to be seriously integrated into magical life. The two worlds are separate for a reason, and to many witches and wizards, that separation isn't just logistical, it's ideological. Which brings me to Voldemort's perspective. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Voldemort wasn't like most witches and wizards. But even then, he wasn't immune to the deep-rooted biases of the magical world. In fact, in some respects, he felt more strongly about the divide between Muggle and magical worlds than anyone. Why coexist with those that he viewed as beneath him? And despite being raised in a Muggle orphanage, Tom Riddle rejected that part of himself completely. He despised his Muggle heritage, and even changed his name to erase it. It was a name I was already using at Hogwarts, to my most intimate friends only, of course. You think I was going to use my filthy Muggle father's name forever? I, in whose veins run the blood of Salazar Slytherin himself, through my mother's side? I keep the name of a foul, common Muggle who abandoned me even before I was born, just because he found out his wife was a witch? No, Harry. I fashioned to myself a new name, a name I knew wizards everywhere would one day fear to speak, when I had become the greatest sorcerer in the world. But perhaps more than anything else, Voldemort thought he was somehow different. He spent his entire life attempting to escape the ordinary, and resorting to the use of a Muggle weapon would have entirely contradicted his life's meaning. I knew I was different, he whispered to his own quivering fingers. I knew I was special, always. I knew there was something. Well, you were quite right, said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling, but watching Riddle intently. You are a wizard. To Voldemort, using a Muggle weapon, even if it worked, would have felt like corruption, like surrendering to a lesser species. It would have undermined the very foundation of his ideology, that magic is might. So while he was willing to experiment with forbidden spells, soul-splitting, immortality, and death-defying rituals, all within the realm of magic, he drew a hard line at crossing into the world he deemed beneath him. But it is also important to remember that Voldemort was a hypocrite. His whole regime operated on the basis that non-purebloods were inherently inferior, all while he himself existed as a half-blood. He weaponized an ideology he didn't even belong to, manipulating pureblood families like the Malfoys into serving a cause that, if applied truthfully, would have rejected him. He hated his Muggle father, erased his birth name, and did everything he could to bury the reality of where he came from. And yet, despite this background, despite his first-hand knowledge of the Muggle world, he deliberately turned his back on it. He didn't just ignore it, he denied it. And in spite of all of his ambition, intelligence, and resolve, Voldemort couldn't see that the very world he dismissed may have held the one thing that could have allowed him to succeed. And ultimately, this may have been the blind spot that cost him everything. What do you guys think? Were Muggle weapons the answer here, or would it all have worked out the same? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.